Hey, welcome to Adventures in Angular, the podcast where we keep you updated on all things Angular related. This show is produced by two companies, Top End Devs and Envoy. Top End Devs is where we create top end devs who get top end pay and recognition while working on interesting problems and making meaningful community contributions. And Envoy, which provides remote design and software development services on a performance basis. So clients only pay when the tasks are delivered and approved. In today's episode, we will talk about migrating to the new Angular features. That means all the tooling, all the new features, and the caveats of how to migrate your current code base to the latest version. Is it really that hard or is it a smooth transition? My name is Lucas Paganini. I'm the founder of Envoy and your host in the podcast. Joining me in today's episode is Charles Maxwood.
Hey, everybody.
And Armen Vardanian.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be back for another one.
Yes. Okay, so let's get into it. Armen, again, you are our expert on the subject. You have been researching a lot about the new features on Angular 17. So let's start with the biggest concern that people have. Is it hard to migrate to Angular 17 or is it a smooth transition?
That's really the most important question, and I would be very happy to say that oh, it's super easy, but I don't like creating.
Yay, we're
illusions.
done. Oh,
No, I don't want to create illusions. Of course, it's a hard one to crack, and there is a bunch of stuff. Like it's not one thing that you can just do overnight, or maybe you just cannot allocate like some fixed amount of time and say, okay, I'm gonna upgrade and I'm gonna have all the latest features and so on, because it involves a bunch of stuff. What I would definitely say from the good parts is that the Angular core team did their absolute best to provide the best possible experience when transitioning to these new tools. We have a bunch of schematics. We will talk about them. That you can run and get lots of things automated for us. There are a bunch of resources. There are a bunch of approaches that one can adopt. And of course, I know lots of developers are frustrated now because most of the Angular folks are stuck around Angular 12 to 14, and even the guys who have like Angular 15 or 16, they actually have the latest version, but are not using all the latest features because those features also require a lot of manual work and a lot of testing. So yeah, it's a steep place to approach, but with the tooling we have, and if you adopt the right approaches, it's definitely possible. So it's not that hard, but you still need to be careful. So yeah, we're gonna talk about that.
And let's talk about in which versions it becomes hard because I recently upgraded many projects from 16 to 17 and that was pretty easy. But again, it was 16 from 17. It was just one version update. But when would it really be a problem? If we're like on version 10, 12,
Yeah.
13?
Well, upgrading itself isn't usually the problem. Upgrading is the beginning of the problems. Like you can upgrade to version 17 right now if you are not too far behind. But if you upgrade to version 17, well, you will have all the stuff that has been improved under the hood, like better optimization. If you have SSR, like you will have better support for SSR and so on. But you would still need to change a bunch of code if you want to adopt the new approaches to writing code. So if you use, well, one thing we need to address is that in Angular version 16, the Angular compatibility compiler, the NGCC, has been removed. So upgrading from 12 to 17 could be even like impossible if you are using dependencies that are not supporting Ivy. Well, you shouldn't. You shouldn't really use those libraries because if in version 16 and 17 they are not supporting Ivy, then they are like such dependencies aren't properly maintained. So it would be best to avoid. But if your project is already married to such a dependency, yeah, you've gonna have real big problem upgrading to Angular 16 and beyond. But say you don't have that problem. Let's say it's okay, you can upgrade to Angular 17 from whatever version. There is a bunch of stuff going on. If you didn't have standalone components, you would want to have standalone components. And that itself is like a very huge migration. You migrate your component code, you migrate your configurations, you migrate like a bunch of stuff. And it entirely depends on how your project was built. So then you would want for example, the image directive. If you're using images, you would be like, oh, okay, sure, let's use the ng optimized directive. But that also involves a bunch of stuff. You need to configure something, you need to import the directive, you need to put the directive. By the way, the image directive has been backported to version 13. So if you are on like 12 and you want it, you can go just to 13. You don't need to upgrade to like version 15 to get the image directive. And then there is the new control flow syntax. Well, it is not stable yet. I mean, you could skip that for now, but there are all the tools available to do the transition right now. Or even if you do that in 6 months, when it becomes stable eventually in version 18, this discussion that we have now will still be relevant, because maybe some syntax thing will change, but the overall stuff will be the same, and the overall upgrade and migration process will be the same. So it's not a version problem. But of course, the newer version you have, the easier at least the initial steps will be. I mean, as you said, from 16 to 17 upgrade like should be painless. Okay.
That makes sense. So I'm just going to jump in and see if I can restate some of this. So, um, as far as backward compatibility goes, you can upgrade it and it'll keep working, right? Your website's not going to crash. It's not going to throw a bunch of ugly errors. It's not going to do anything you don't expect. What we're talking about is, hey, there's a bunch of great stuff in the newer versions that you probably want to take advantage of to make your development faster, to make your app runs more smoothly, to get better performance and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the case.
So you talked a little bit about some of these things. It's like, you may want to upgrade, like you said, you may want standalone components. So what does that process look like? Because I kind of dabble in Angular, and so I don't actually know what that process looks like, right? I may have written some
Yeah.
standalone components at some point. I may have written some older components at some point, and I've never had to push from one to the other.
Yeah, so standalone, yeah, that's a good place to start, because it's an older change. We got standalone in version 14, and in version
Right.
15 it is stable. So we had a lot of time to try to upgrade. So the great thing about standalone is that fully interoperates with modules. So what one can do is sort of do the migration iteratively. Okay, like incremental steps. You do one component, then you do another
Right.
component. You remove one ng module, then you remove another. Then at the end of the day, just remove the root module. You configure using the functional APIs, the new APIs, and then you are done. Of course, that's a manual approach. Okay, which is reasonable, especially if you have like a huge project. Then
Right.
yeah, maybe you can change one thing, another thing, change the tests, and in the end of the day, be sure that nothing broke. Okay, but yeah, that takes a lot of time. For a project that is like less risky, you can easily use the schematic that the Angular team provides. So they give you this schematic, which goes, as far as I remember, it was like ng generate at Angular / standalone, something like that. Well, the exact command is irrelevant, but you have this command that you can run on your project inside your, say, project root, and then it will scan through your files and find engine modules and find components and make components standalone. And the beautiful thing about the schematic is that it actually works in 3 steps. So you have to run it 3 times. First time, it will mark your components as standalone. So what it will do, It will go find all the component decorators and put standalone true there. And because the component is now standalone, it cannot be declared in an ng module, but it can be imported into an ng module. And then it will go to the ng module where it is declared and just remove the declaration and put it inside the import statement.
Okay.
And that way, you get the situation that sure, now this component is using it imports the stuff itself, so it will add the imports that this component is using from the ng module, and it will turn it into standalone. So now you have a bunch of standalone components, but your application architecture is ng module based. Okay. The second time you run the command, it will actually go around and update the imports for those components that are now standalone. So now they only fully import not the module, but they import like other standalone components from your project. And finally, you can run the command the third time, and it will just, because after these two commands, your ng modules are essentially obsolete. You don't really need them because everything is declared around standalone. And then you can just run the command the third time, and it will remove the ng modules that are now useless. Okay, and it will create the main TS file and the app config TS file that we have now with new Angular project, put the dependencies there and so on. And yeah, you can put a flag that will start using the standalone APIs. For example, if you are using router module, it will remove it and put the provide router and so on. It's not ideal. It's not ideal because sometimes it will miss something, especially if you have like circular dependencies and so on. I will mention about that also. A good thing, if you have a large project, you can actually run this command in a subdirectory. So instead of instantly moving your entire app, you can, for example, if you have a module-based architecture, you can pick one feature module, I don't know, users module. Okay, let's convert this to standalone. Convert it, run the tests, I don't know, check it manually. If you think everything is good, you can move to another module and then and so on until you're left with just root module, which you can even remove just manually. Okay.
And there are also modules that, for example, they use for root and they dynamically provide something, and not, for example, not every third-party library that uses that structure has been fully migrated to standalone. So one option is to also use import providers from. That was actually really important for the migration of many of the projects that we had. So if you're using dynamic providers, I think that actually also works with regular modules, right, Armen? Like if you just want to, yeah. So if you just want to migrate, like you don't want to really get rid of the ng modules right now, but you want to at least migrate the bootstrap file to use the new standalone bootstrap and to use the application config isolated from the rest. You can do that by using this function called import providers from. So this function is imported from Angular core, and it allows you to pass all the modules as arguments to it, and then it's just going to provide them as you were already doing with your regular app module in the past.
That's a really good catch. I actually kind of forgot about the import providers from function. ng modules are not gone. They're not deprecated. There are no official plans on deprecating. I mean, maybe eventually, we don't know, but right now it's not on the roadmap. So the Angular team is clear that ng modules are here. If you want to use standalone, no problem. Actually, inside Angular, there is a bunch of stuff that is still ng module based. Form controls, forms module, reactive forms module, they're still there. You have to import the modules to be able to use. By the way, I actually investigated, and you know what's the reason behind that? Like all the other stuff is standalone now, right? You have ng class, ng switch, blah blah blah. All of that is standalone, but the ng module, the ng model, form control, and so on directives, they are not standalone. And the thing is that actually, like when you put ng model, well, there is a directive called ng model, right? But actually, it's not just one directive. It's actually a family of directives, because ng model for a radio button is completely different from an ng model for, let's say, I don't know, select HTML element or a usual input. So actually, under the hood, there are multiple ng model directives. One matches for radio buttons, one matches for inputs, and so on. And if you want to use them, you need to import the entire thing. So you are able to put like ng model on whatever native HTML form element you want. That's why for now and for the foreseeable future, those ng modules will place there. I mean, I would bet that in the future, ng modules will be sort of marketed not as like application backbone or a way to create architecture, but rather a way to group related components, maybe even standalone components, so that if you know that these things are always used in conjunction, okay, you can group them in a module and maybe import them all together. I'm not sure about it. There's just speculation, but with the way this is going, it is one possibility. Yeah.
I think that makes a ton of sense, like doing the standalone migration first. And you're right, like the only reason why I haven't felt that much of a pain to migrate was because I was already, I had already migrated those things before. So you're right. One thing that didn't work out super well to me though was uh, the new control flow syntax and running the migration on NX. Like it wasn't so straightforward to run the migration using NX because I had to, like, the regular ng command wouldn't work. So I would have to use it through NX and pass some other parameters to it. And then there was also like two particular components that weren't properly migrated. Like, yes, they were at first, but if I ran it again, it would actually generate some issues because like I had stuff inside my ng switch, and I can't have things inside ng switch anymore. You can only have things inside inside switch cases and the default case, but you can't just have things lying around inside the switch block. So that was actually a problem that I had with the migration. But other than that, which was something that I was able to migrate manually, everything else was pretty straightforward.
That's actually an interesting point. I've never thought about it. The having some content other than cases. Although I have tried out the schematic on a, let's say, usual project, not with NX. It worked wonderfully for me. Uh, Actually, it worked only on the templates, which kind of makes sense because if you remove the imports, that might possibly break something. But actually, someone on Twitter corrected me today that there's actually a flag that you can put, and the command will also just remove the imports for ngif, ngSwitch, and so on. What was interesting for me, like one important point, is that with the new syntax, the track modifier is required for loops, right? So with ng4, you could skip like the track by function. Well, you shouldn't, but most of the people skip that anyway. With the new syntax, it requires that you put a tracker, like in React, when it requires to put a key when we're mapping over an array. And the same now is true for Angular, which is a good development. I welcome it. But it's a bit tricky with the migration because when you do the migration, obviously, lots of cases you will not have a track by function. And what it will do, it will put, like if you have, let's say, ng4 let item of items, it will change it to for item of items and then track item. So essentially, it's just a useless modifier because it tracks the exact reference to the object, which could obviously change without meaning a change that must result in a re-render, right? And that is okay in the sense that nothing will break. Actually, your app will continue working as usual. But you should probably jump on the opportunity and provide something more meaningful to the track modifier, like maybe ID or whatever you are using to differentiate between objects in a collection, right? Yeah, that's one point. And another point is that the switch case syntax, now the switch case matching happens on strict equality. Okay. Actually, ng switch works with loose equality. I don't know why. I'm not sure. And I believe you could modify that with some injection token, but that's like really obscure knowledge at this point. So if you change, there is a small possibility if your code relied on loose equality for matching cases, which again, it shouldn't have probably, but you have such a case, it probably will introduce a bug into your switch cases. So I would suggest, migrating if statements, the ng if directive, that's just a piece of cake, like no problem. But with switch and for loops, you should probably be a bit more careful. But in general, it's more of a mechanical thing. It's easier to do than a standalone migration, I think. A standalone involves a bunch of interconnected stuff, and for loop is a for loop. It's in one place. Actually, I noticed that I tested it with different tricks to see how it would work, the migration. And actually, if you, for example, put an ng if statement on an ng container, so ng container is not like an element itself, right? It's just a placeholder where you could put, like, for example, ng if, right? It will actually just remove the ng container. It will just wrap the elements inside, it will wrap in the if statement and be done with it. And that's really cool, because with ng if, you always needed either a one current element that will host everything inside, or you were forced to use ng containers. Now you can just write an if statement, and the schematic does that. It will remove ng container and put the if in its stead. Yeah, so that's really cool, I think.
I agree. Like, just having those automated migrations makes our life so much easier, and it also makes it so much easier to defend Angular, because there's always a friend that is going to say, oh, you're using Angular, they released a new version, like you're going to have a bad time. And because in the very
Not if
old
they're doing
days,
React.
Yeah, indeed.
With React server.
Well, your friend did.
Yeah. So nowadays we can just say, yeah, man, like we don't really have that problem anymore. They're not going to believe us anyways, because most of them don't even try it, but we know that we actually have a good excuse to tell them, hey, no, actually it's much easier to upgrade nowadays. Yeah.
I would say it's totally worth it. I mean, imagine how many new projects start with Angular, and you have already all of these awesome features. Oh, we're gonna do signals next. How to migrate to signals, because there is no schematic for that.
That is a very good point, and I don't think we're gonna have, right, just to make it clear to the audience, like it's not something that is being done and you just have to wait.
Oh, I don't think it's something that is even like theoretically possible, because how would you figure out if something needs to be a signal or not? I mean, one approach would be to go through the template, see what stuff is a signal, is a binding, and just like convert those properties to signals, which I guess, I mean, it could be done, but it could be problematic too. Like, if it's a Boolean property, okay, we can do that easily. We could go and say, okay, whenever we say, let's say you have a loading property, which is a Boolean, now we want to turn it into signal. Well, no problem. You just, instead of saying like loading equals true, you could say loading equals signal true. And whenever you assign something to the loading property, you say loading equals false, for example. Instead of that, you could just do loading dot set true. Okay, that's a simple case. But okay, how about an array? So you could have an array of a signal of an array. I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable use case. And now you have a bunch of, let's say, array.push statements. How do you go on about converting that? Do you use I mean, that's a bunch of stuff that you need to consider, and I'm not really sure you could like deterministically convert all of them. It's gonna involve manual labor. Okay. And again, you don't need all of your properties to be signals, so it really depends. But there are manual approaches that you can adopt that would probably result in a pretty smooth transition. Because again, signals, they're just reactive primitives. You can use them, you cannot use them. You can use both signals and like usual properties. So you can just do it. Let's say I noticed that I used this word a lot in last year, incrementally. One amazing place to start, if you have behavior subjects in your Angular code, you just don't ditch them and use a signal, because essentially behavior subject and the signal are the same thing at the end of the day. Of course, behavior subject, you could pipe and add operators to it, but in most cases you are using something like map or tap. So either a side effect or transformation into another observable. So well, for the first one, you can use an effect for side effects, which is also you can just take the same callback, put it into an effect statement, and be done with it. And for maps, you can use computed properties. So conversion of a behavior subject to signal in 95% of the cases is going to be very smooth. Okay. So yeah, you could just hunt for behavior subjects in your code and just turn them into signals. If you have ordinary subjects or observables, well, no problem. Wrap them in a to signal, like use RxJS interop, convert them to signal. Now your templates are not using the async pipe. So it's an overall improvement. And again, you can go on about like the simple properties that are reactive. Again, if you have like a loading Boolean property, it's fairly easy to manually convert it to signal. Not a big deal at all. Will not break anything. Just keep in mind that you gotta have problems with objects. So you can start with primitive properties like strings, booleans, so on. And then in the final part, you can move on to modifying arrays, making them into signals of arrays. So yeah, that's the approach that I would adopt, because there's never gonna be a schematic for it. I don't think so.
Armen, how do you feel about signals versus behavior subjects in contexts where it's not just a component? For example, I have some utilities that I reuse in many of my projects, and a lot of them rely heavily on RxJS to do some logic. For example, I have something that does I'm trying to remember the name that I gave to it. I think it's like threshold controller or something like that. It's a utility that I created so that I could run a bunch of jobs in parallel, but also make sure that I could limit the amount that was running at the same time. So it's basically a queue, but it allows jobs to be parallelized up to a certain amount, right? So I built that and I used RxJS and behavior subjects to listen to the changes in how many jobs are active and how many jobs are completed, etc. So as you can see, it's not a very Angular specific thing. It's a piece of code that I can even reuse in a backend environment, in an environment that has nothing to do with Angular whatsoever. But I was wondering if for such scenarios there would be something simpler than a behavior subject, but I also understand that I can't use a signal because I want it to work on other environments. So what I'm actually asking is there like a not Angular specific version of a signal that I can use in such cases?
Uh, uh, well, you mentioned parallelizing tasks, so it's gonna be asynchronous, right?
Good point.
So there is no version of signals in existence right now that could do that. The whole shtick of the signals is that they're synchronous, like almost completely synchronous. So computed properties and proper signals, they are synchronous, and effects, they are asynchronous, kind of. Like in reality, yeah, they are asynchronous, though they work in bit of different fashion that you would expect. So yeah, essentially, almost all of the stuff that revolves around signals is asynchronous. My go-to approach is to see if the logic that I'm trying to incorporate, like when we say reactive, often people think that, oh, that's asynchronous, but that's not really the case. You could have reactive code that's synchronous. Reactive is essentially just notifying somewhere that something happened, but you can do that synchronously, right? You have an array of callbacks and you just call one of the callbacks, and now all the consumers are notified, but there hasn't been an async tick, right? So if I have something that is reactive, I would just use signals, reactive but not asynchronous. If I have something like a stream of events, then I'm gonna have asynchronicity, right? Async code. Then I'm gonna use RxJS because I cannot possibly use signals for that because signals are synchronous. How am I, for example, how I'm gonna check that there are, let's say, these many parallel tasks going on if the update to one task triggers all the computed properties and so on? That won't be really feasible, and it should not, because signals are reactive states, and RxJS is now reserved for asynchronous events. So you have streams of events, not state, and you have reactive state, not events. That's the whole, let's say, upgrade for us. And actually, there is another like Angular problem with that. Like, what people will do, they would say, okay, let's use RxJS, for example, in services for all the stuff going on, like event bus, whatever. And then we'll say, but okay, in the component, I want to use the signal version of this. I want to derive some state from these events and use it as a signal in a component, which is completely valid use case. And what they will do, they will like call toSignal in the service. Now you've got yourself a problem because toSignal immediately subscribes to the observable, and maybe that observable just waits to be subscribed. So it doesn't work. It's a cold observable. Now you subscribe to it, so it's now a hot observable. More so, even if the component where you are using it gets destroyed, well, bad luck. You called toSignal in the service, and if the service is provided in the root injector, well, that it's gonna leave. That subscription is gonna leave until the end of the entire application. So what you need to do is either just use the toSignal function in the component, or if you want more like even more granular control, you probably should I don't know, add some method on your service. That's a real approach that people are using now. You call it the connect method, and you call connect method whenever you need it in the component. Like you have something in the service, you say connect, and now all the signals are connected to the observable. Only after that it will begin to work, and then it will be destroyed in ng destroy. You can add the logic inside that specific function. Okay, you cannot do async stuff with signals, like bottom line.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You're right. My question entirely didn't make sense after I realized.
No, it did because I mean it's perfectly natural, especially if when you talk about, like, your example was really good because we're talking about a set of things that are working asynchronously. So you have essentially a state. It's not even a question about what events those other, let's say, tasks would emit at some point. It's a question of how you can keep track of them and so on. You could do that part with signals, but the very moment you connect to the actual streams, you can no longer really use signals for that. That's the problem. You could use it for a state, if you have reactive state. But if you have a list of events, well, bad luck. I mean, you could derive, like today I did a small thing for upcoming training of mine. So it's a clock, okay? It's a clock that displays the current time. And I want to do that with a signal. So what I do, I use RxJS interval, map it to the current date, okay, then use toSignal. Now I have a signal of the current date, which constantly, every second, it gets updated. But it's a state now. It's a date that changed depending on, I don't know, whatever. Doesn't matter. Maybe I'm getting the current date time via a WebSocket from a server or whatever. For that reason, And now I have a signal. Now I can just do a computed property, and now I have myself a beautiful formatted time that I can display in the HTML. We should realize that the main point of signals, outside of clean code and so on, is to aid with change detection, is to be as granular as possible and as simple to adopt. Like they could do it with ArcGIS too, because ArcGIS also notifies about changes, right? Behavior subject, as we mentioned. But they wanted something really simple that you can just drop, say signal of this, okay, set value, read value, okay, I'm done. Because under the hood, it does call, I don't know, mark component dirty. You might have seen in Angular 17, they have like really silently introduced this thing called local change detection. So if you're not familiar with signals, if your component and all its ancestors are on push, which is often the case with lots of projects, like people like to mark their components on push. Now, in that component, if a signal is changed, only that component is change detected. No parents are marked as dirty if they are also on push, which is actually a very, very significant development, because up until this point, your best case optimization was to run change detection only on components ancestor instead of all of the components in the project. Now you can just say, okay, change detect this one component, and you don't have to do much. Just use signals and put change detection strategy on push. Yeah. That's the main reason for signals.
Signals are magic. They're really cool.
They are. They still have problems that they need to work out, but well, the API is stable, so we're okay using them. Other than effect is not stable yet.
Okay.
But you shouldn't probably use effects that much anyway. Like 99% of scenarios, you don't really need an effect.
Yep. Okay. Do you think there's any other major thing that we should cover on the subject of today's episode in terms of migrations to the latest version?
One last thing. Yeah, one last thing. That is, of course, SSR. Now, well, I think we did the last episode on SSR in general, and we mentioned that SSR now its own package inside Angular, so you don't have like Angular universal separately. Now you just have Angular/SSR. And the cool thing about it is also supports like the ng-add schematic. So if you have a project that is not SSR, you can add SSR using the ng-add Angular/SSR command. And it will do a bunch of stuff. It will generate a server TS file, if I remember correctly, a main.server TS file. Those are actually different. You have one server TS file, which has like a Node.js server config, and you have a main server TS file that is an Angular config for the server. And it will add all the stuff that you need. It will add client-side hydration, and so on and so on. So in general, it's a simple schematic. So it's probably the easiest outside of the things that we're talking about, because SSR itself, the schematic of migration is pretty straightforward. You don't change the actual code. I will talk about it now. You don't need to change the actual code in 99% of scenarios. So yeah, it makes sense to run a schematic. Then you're gonna have some bugs, and those bugs you will have only in the scenario where you are actually updating the DOM using like the browser APIs. If you are doing something like document dot let's say append child or whatever, for those cases you should use the renderer. And for the cases where you really need to access the DOM, you should use the new functions that we have, the after render and after next render, which ensure that some functionality runs only on the client side. But again, on top of my head, you usually discover those bugs like immediately, because you open a page and it cannot render, because you only have those problems if you are calling those functions in lifecycle hooks. Like if you have a method that does some DOM manipulation when the user clicks something, well, the user clicking something is already in the browser. You don't have a problem there. You don't need to wrap it in after next render or whatever. You only have problem when you do DOM manipulation in the constructor, or say in ng on init, ng after view init, and so on, because those lifecycle methods will be called on the server. Okay, while server is rendering there, it will call ng on init, because nginx maybe is fetching data or whatever to render the component. In those cases, it means that if you have a problem like that, you open that page, you immediately see an error. You see that, oh, what is document? What is window? I don't know. And it's an immediate giveaway that, okay, that's the problem. And the solution is also easy. Just take that code, put it inside after next vendor, it will work. In, again, 99% of scenarios, maybe you have something super complex, which could be. In that case, you probably will put more legwork. But in general, I think the transition to SSR, if you want to do it, on a fairly large project should take a day or two in general. Because again, you're not changing the actual code. Your component codes, your templates, they will stay the same. You will just change very granular pieces which might not even exist in your project if you're just doing, more bigger concern for libraries, that is, but not for, enterprise application, so on and so on.
Cool.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I agree. And for, as you mentioned, for everyone that wants to dive deeper into SSR, the last episode was just about that. So you can check it out whatever you're listening to the show, and we go way deeper on SSR in the last episode. So you're gonna really know if you should do it, how you should do it, the caveats, pros, cons, etc. So all that good stuff is there. And yeah, I think we can start wrapping up from here.
Yeah.
Let's do our promos first, and actually let's start with Armen, because I heard he has something interesting.
I have a long promotion. So for a long time, I guess the last 6-7 months, I've been actually writing a book about Angular. I'm writing a book for the mining publication. Maybe some of our listeners heard about that publication. It's fairly popular. Lots of amazing books they have out there. The book is called Modern Angular. And so it's exactly what we have been discussing in the last, I guess, 10 to 15 episodes, all the stuff that is new and shining in the latest Angular versions. So standalone components, inject function, signals, RxJS interoperability, all the small stuff, SSR, unit testing, template syntax, deferred loading, everything that you know about Angular, starting from versions, I would say 14. Everything that is new is in this book now. That's how I know all these migration schematics. Yeah, when you are writing a chapter about, say standalone, you got to tell people how to migrate. The book is structured in that way. So in the book, we are sort of coding along an enterprise project with real life problems to solve. And we are using all the latest features. And each chapter, outside of just developing that part of the application, also has a how to migrate section. So for example, for standalone components, we build some standalone components in the project. We connect them, we provide routing, we provide lazy loading, and so on and so on. And in the final part, we have, now we have a existing project. How do we approach this? What are the caveats? What are the problems I might encounter? How the schematic works? What if I want to do it manually? And essentially, this works for almost all chapters, because all the new stuff we're going to talk about how to migrate to it. So each chapter has its own subsections on migration. The book is now in early access. The first 3 chapters are now available. Actually, it happened today, 29th of November. Actually, you forgot about it, and they just got an email that, your book is live. So the first 3 chapters covering standalone components and the inject function, pretty interesting functionality, those chapters are live. I think I put the link to the book in the chat, so let's have it in the episode description. Would love to see any feedback, would love to see comments. There's a live book forum. So if you have any questions, if any comments, I will be active on the forum too, trying to address all the stuff coming in from the readers. Hopefully, anyone who want to try the book out, I hope you enjoy it. I've put a lot of work and a lot of love in it. It was really amazing experience. So yeah, looking forward for the other chapters to come around.
Awesome.
Yeah, congrats, man. I know you've been working on it for a very long time. I'm actually going to send this here. Would it be okay to send it in the comment section so that everyone that may be watching us from streaming on YouTube, LinkedIn, etc., can see?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right, the link is there. And that also makes sure that we are not gonna forget to include it in the show notes, because now it's already in the comments. Actually, Armen, I think there's. I actually sent a broken link. I'm so sorry. Let me send another one
Okay.
with the correct one.
Yeah, I was gonna just.
Yeah, I included an opens
Yeah.
word at the end, and I broke the link. Sorry. Okay, now it's correct. All right. Again, huge congrats to you, and really for all of you that are looking to improve your best practices in Angular and just update yourself on the framework, I highly encourage checking out Armen's book. And just the fact that you can read the first chapters for free for now, like, this is such a big opportunity for people to
Yeah.
experiment before buying it. So, like, don't waste this opportunity. This is kind of having an open house. So yeah, definitely check it out, because this is going to be one of the best chances for you to try out the content before you make a decision to buy it or not. All right.
Yep.
Chuck, how about you?
So I am right on the verge of launching a couple of memberships on Top End Devs. And I think the one that is most relevant to this. So I'm doing a React membership, but I'm also doing a JavaScript membership. And we're going to have weekly or it'll be at least 3 times a month. We'll have a meetup, and we'll be on a Zoom call, and the calls are going to kind of rotate between 3 different things. One of them's going to be a Q&A, right? So I'll have some of my expert friends show up, or I'll just answer your questions myself, or however that works. We're also going to have an expert show up for one of the calls every month and talk to us about some aspect of JavaScript or web development or something like that, right? Incidentally, the other membership I'm launching is the Ruby membership, and so same idea, right? The last one's going to be kind of a get to know you kind of meetup, and then I'm also going to be having once a month more of a career soft skills meetup that is part of all the memberships. And so that's what I'm launching. It'll also include a screencast series. I plan on putting out a couple of videos every week demonstrating some aspect of JavaScript or web or tooling or something. So if you go to javascriptgeniuses.com, you'll be able to sign up. I just bought the domain the other day, and I'm getting it all pointed to the right place. So you can come see what it's about and come sign up. So yeah, if you're interested in participating in that, then definitely check it out. You can come see all the meetups and when they're scheduled and all that stuff. You can just go to topenddevs.com/calendar. You can see all that stuff too. But yeah, that's the big launch. That's the big thing that I'm working on right now.
Nice.
That
Huge
sounds
news
really interesting.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still the same, so my promo is still gonna be, if you're interested in staff augmentation or software outsourcing, unvoid.com offers performance-based software development services. So the clients only pay when tests are delivered and approved, which currently is the safest way for you to outsource or augment your staff. Also, they work on US time zones, so they are a nearshore software development
Nice.
agencies. They're not off. It's outshore or offshore. I think it's offshore.
Offshore.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the time zones are not crazy. So if you end up choosing to work with Envoy, you're gonna know for sure that you and the engineers are gonna be available at the same time, which is really important for most companies. looking to collaborate. And yeah, I think this is all for today. I don't have anything else to contribute. I think this was very in depth. And yeah, again, Armen, Chuck, thank you so much for joining. It's always good to have more people on the show.
Yeah, max out, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.